Hello and welcome to Dialogue. This year marks the 72nd anniversary of the peaceful liberation of the Xizang Autonomous Region, and China hosts a forum on the region's development. So what are the highlights of this forum? How has Xizang developed in regard to people's lives and human rights situation over the past decades? And how can this region better play a role in exchanges between China and South Asian countries, for example? To find out more, I'm glad to be joined by Colin Mackerras, emeritus professor from Griffith University, and Rafael Henrique Zerbetto, editor and language consultant of Esperanto section of China Report magazine at Asia Pacific Center of CICG. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue. Professor Mackerras, I will start with you. I understand both of you actually have been to Xizang multiple times. I want to ask you a question, since, most of the people, in particular people, beyond China, they have little chance to probably never been to Xizang. So tell us your understanding of Xizang. How different is it from, say, the impression people got probably from the media, in particular from Western media, for example?
Well, one thing I would like to comment on is that every time I've been there, I've been very struck by how alive the Tibetan culture is. People seem to believe in the Tibetan Buddhism very strongly, and they have their architecture, their diet, the weaving their clothes, and all kinds of things that we associate with culture. They seem to not to have set aside the traditional one. I do think that there are weakening of tradition as the country modernizes, as China and with it Xizang and Tibet modernize. But I see no danger of Tibetan culture dying out. Now this is important because a lot of people in the West say that China has destroyed Tibetan culture. And the Dalai Lama in 1996, in front of the British Parliament, he actually accused China of cultural genocide. He said that China was deliberately destroying Tibetan culture. Now that seems to me to be untrue. In fact, I think it's outrageous and unfair. And he's made that accusation several times since then, and a lot of people believe him. And I think that's very dangerous. Mm-hmm. You asked me what is the difference between reality and what people believe. Well, I think that's the main one, but I mean there are quite a few others. But I begin there with that one, and maybe we can talk about others later on.
Good. And Rafael, so what impressed you the most? You have been there multiple times. Now you are in Lhasa, the capital city of autonomous region in Xizang. So how different is it from, say, your previous experience?
Well, it's always nice to come to Tibet. It's a place with very nice people. They are very receptive, always welcome people from other places of China and also from other countries. And of course, I have this impression that what foreign media says about Xizang really doesn't correspond to the situation we find here. So foreign media, they always say that people here are oppressed, that the Buddhists cannot freely practice their religion. And here we can see, like now in these days, many Buddhists came to Lhasa on pilgrimage. I could see them on the streets, going to the temples, practicing their Buddhist rites with no problem. Like the authorities even assist them. There is all the assistance for them to be able to come here and do everything they want to do according to their beliefs. And also I see that the lives of local people improved a lot. For example, they have better infrastructure now. They have highways, even high-speed railway. I used it to come to Lhasa some days ago. And also people have a higher income, better opportunities for work. So this is what I feel really important. We need to see if the people's lives are being improved or not. Mm-hmm. And here I can clearly see that people are living better than they lived before.
Yeah, Rafael, you mentioned about the infrastructure, etc. Recently there's, I think, an opening of a high-speed rail between Lhasa and Linchi in the southwestern part of the region. It used to take like more than 10 hours to drive from Lhasa to Linchi. Now with this high-speed rail, it's about more than 3 hours. And that's a lot of convenience for people to go back and forth, right?
It's really convenient, and there is the same level of those trains, the high-speed trains that we have in other parts of China.
Yes, just like the other part of China. Professor Mackerras, you are going to jump in?
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of people in the West, especially, accuse China about human rights abuse in Tibet. And Rafael just commented on that with respect to religion. But I think if we can interpret human rights as being the general improvement of if the general level of the people and the general welfare of the people is improved, that seems to me to be good human rights. And I think that's what's happened in Tibet. I mean, there's multiple data to suggest that. I mean, that one thing that's been mentioned is the high-speed railways, and I think the high-speed railway system in China is absolutely marvelous. I think it's the best in the world. But you can look at other data as well. And for example, extreme poverty and hunger, that's been eliminated in Tibet, as in Xizang, as it has elsewhere in China. And then another thing that we can talk about, which I think is really important, and that is levels of education. Now, of course, I think it's true that Tibet has a lower literacy rate than other parts of China, but it's still gone up a great deal recently. And for people between the ages of 15 and 60, it's now virtually 100%, and that's a really great achievement. And I think that those things matter. I mean, the fact is that what the United Nations it called the demands that it was making to improve the human livelihood, and they include also not only what I've already mentioned, like poverty and education. They also include things that people care about, like maternity mortality rates, infant mortality rates. Those have dropped enormously in the last few years. And that's a good thing. That makes people much happier. It makes them more confident about life. And I just think it's simply not true that China is practicing these frightful human rights abuses that people talk about so much in the West. And I think it's based on a false understanding. I think it's based on a lot of propaganda that the Americans especially, and with the support of the Dalai Lama, they push endlessly. Mm-hmm. And it's true that there are a lot of people in the West, especially including among young people, who follow the Tibetan Buddhism. They think it's very fashionable, and they look to the Dalai Lama as a kind of icon. But I think it's just based on a false understanding.
Yeah, false understanding. Professor, you mentioned a very interesting point. When Dalai Lama accused, the Chinese government of so-called destroying the culture or the Buddhism of there. But then, if you look at the worldwide, I mean, for example, English is basically the global language, and many young people in different countries, they spend a lot of time in learning English at the expense of their native language. For example, some of us, like we Chinese, we spend so many years learning English. Sometimes you are not that confident about your own language. Of course, here in China, the standard language is Chinese. And for the ethnic, minorities, they basically need to learn both languages, their own language and the standard language, right?
That's right. And I mean, the question I mentioned literacy before. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd be interested in Rafael's view about all this too, but I just mentioned literacy. And I mean, if you raise the question of literacy, it does beg the question of whether that means literacy in Chinese or literacy in Tibetan, because of course Tibetan has a very good literature. It has its own script. And I mean, it seems obvious to me that in the People's Republic of China, it is useful to know Chinese. And I don't mind people learning Chinese in the school. I think that's a very good thing. I think it's not so good if they don't, if they forget Tibetan. But I don't see that as happening. And I mean, I understand that Tibetan may be used in the schools as a medium of instruction, a bit less than used to be the case a decade or so ago. But I don't see any danger of Tibetan dying out as a language. And that means, of course, then again, you might want to distinguish between the private sphere and the public sphere. I mean, the private sphere being what language people speak at home. And I mean, obviously, Tibetans speak Tibetan at home in Tibet. I mean, if they come to other parts of China, of course, they may speak Chinese. But I think in the private sphere, it's very, very strong. Now, as for the public sphere, that means the education system, the government, the law system, and things like that, and commerce and so on. I think it's possible that Tibetan is getting weaker, but I don't think it's dying out at all. Mm-hmm. And I would just point out that when you have a modernization process, and there has been a very strong modernization process in Tibet and all over China in the last few years, and the last few decades, I think we can say, then the Tibet traditional cultures tend to weaken everywhere. I mean, if you think of Europe, for example, which has got very strong, a country like France, it's got all these wonderful medieval cathedrals and churches all over. But people are much more secular now than they used to be. And that's just normal. It doesn't show that the Chinese government is trying to suppress Tibetan culture. It doesn't show that at all. What strikes me is how strong Tibetan culture is, not how weak.
Mm-hmm. Rafael, what's your impression in terms of literacy improvement there, and also, as the professor mentioned about, if you compare the situation with European countries, for example, there's a falling number of people going to the church. Does not mean the government is destroying the religious practice, right?
Well, about this specific topic, I think it's just a necessary result, as an evident result of the development of the region. Some people say that when your life is harder, when you have more hardships in life, you tend to you need to believe in something, and then that's when many people get attached to religion. I'm not saying that religion is just something that you shouldn't pay attention. Of course, there are people who truly believe in that, even though they have a very good life. Mm-hmm. But there is a tendency. So when we take a statistic approach, that the more developed countries, more people tend to keep religion in a lower importance.
Yeah, a lower importance. But of course, religion aside, the cultural issue aside, when it comes to poverty alleviation, earlier we touched upon a little bit. Poverty alleviation, we know that China as a country, there's a massive achievement in lifting people, and 800 million people out of poverty, absolute poverty. That's definitely something in terms of progresses. What about Xizang? You've been to different places. You see remarkable progress also in probably on a par with the national achievement.
Sure. I visited many places in China since I moved here 7 years ago, and the work that China has been doing on poverty alleviation is really amazing, because there is a directed approach. So there are officers who go to each place and see the specific needs and potentials of the place and how to develop the potential of that place. So here, for example, in Xizang, I visited Lulang. It's a place that is very, very beautiful. It has a natural importance for tourism. It can attract many tourists. So in that region specifically, the government tried to boost the tourism for the region. So they improved the access to the place, built a road, helped the local people to establish their businesses, like, for example, homestays, etc. So the tourists can go there. They have good facilities there. it's a good example. But also we can see that here in Xizang there were development. So this shows that it's possible from a different approach in each part of the region. You can adopt a different strategy to lift people up from poverty. Yeah. And it's really effective. So I'm very happy to see that the people here now, they have a better life. And those who are living in poverty, they are now living in a higher life standard.
Rafael, you are in Xizang, and you have been to different places. Of course, the West, in particular the United States, often, basically on a yearly basis, accuse China of human rights issues. They often single out, for example, Xizang or Xinjiang. Do you see there are human rights issues in parts of the region?
Well, I think we need to understand that when we talk about human rights, different countries have different concepts about human rights. I am Brazilian. I am from South America, and in South America, what we have, like, we see that there is much poverty and social inequalities. So for us, we understand the human rights from this approach that we need to fight poverty first. We need to give people a better life. When we talk about human rights, we are talking essentially about the right to live. You must have your life. So you must have food to eat. You must have a job. You must have conditions to make your life by yourself, to have your life. When we talk about the United States, when they are talking about the human rights, they follow a different approach. They ignore the basic needs of the people, and they focus on a geopolitical discourse that is important for them. That is like they promote an idea, a concept of democracy and freedom that is based in the neoliberalism, the idea that the state should be reduced to a minimum power, and that the private sector should regulate everything, should decide everything by themselves. And in the practice, it gives much power to those who are already powerful, and creates like a situation when, like, it has the myth of the self-made man, the idea that if you are poor, you are guilty because of that. You didn't work enough to leave poverty. But actually, this is not the truth. When we see, like, people need to have opportunities to leave poverty and to build a better life for them. And this is exactly what China is doing. What I noticed here in China is that the government could identify, it didn't simply give assistance to the people, like, we will give you money and you are out of poverty. No, the government built, created jobs, created opportunities for entrepreneurship, created the infrastructure, everything that the people needed to be lifted up from poverty by themselves. So they had to work to leave the poverty behind, but at the same time they received the necessary assistance they had to be able to live to that condition they had before.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mackerras, you are nodding your heads. Seems like there are different approaches. Like here in China, it's just, the practice is different. Like when the government find out there is a problem, they wouldn't say, okay, you are free, lift yourself out of poverty. The government take it as its own duty or accountability, responsibility. You know what? We need to work hard to help you lift out of the poverty. But in different parts of the world, the practice could be different.
I think so. That's right. I think that the Chinese government feels it has a responsibility to better the lives of the common people in an all-round way. And as far as Xizang is concerned, I'd like to add that the Americans, ever since the 50s, have been going out of their way to use Tibet as a way of opposing the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, I saw a documentary set in the 50s, which showed all these attempts to undermine the new government, and of course they thought that they were doing a good thing. That's what the documentary showed. But as far as the Chinese government is concerned, of course, that's just the very opposite. And they're not going to just give in because the Americans don't favor such and such a a political regime. Why should they? I think that they're doing a good thing to resist that. And I think it, as far as human rights are concerned, it's a bit rich to say, well, we're going to do everything we can to try and to overthrow this government. And if the government resists, we're going to accuse them of human rights. Of course, they're going to resist, and so they should. I just think it's very illogical, and I think it's also very bad and very well. I think I'd go so far as to say it's treacherous to take that sort of policy and then blame somebody if they resist that policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor, you mentioned about basically the weaponization of human rights issue, for geopolitical gains, especially nowadays. The U.S. is, people believe the U.S. is having a Cold War against China or containment policy against China. So they are using, for example, Hong Kong issue or Taiwan question against China. Of course, similarly, Xinjiang, Xizang. We know human rights issue is another political weapon they can use against the Chinese government, against the rights of country. So it's getting more complicated. Can we say that?
I certainly think you can. Yes, I mean I think the evidence of the new Cold War everywhere. And since we're talking about Xizang, we could stick to ethnic minorities because they're using the whole question of ethnic minorities as a weapon to try and undermine China and oppose its rise. They don't want it to rise because they want to stay number one. And I think that the way that they're going on about that is very bad. And it's not only Xizang, but also in Xinjiang, they're accusing China of human rights abuses, and they're using it as a weapon to try and embarrass China and to make it worse for China, and in the process they make it worse for the people of the region. And I just think it's a very bad policy, and I think it's a very wrong policy too, actually. And I think that China can't possibly agree to it and just say, oh, well, you can do that, it's all right. They have to resist it, and I think they're quite right to say that it's that countries like the US should stay out of China's internal affairs. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we talk about Hong Kong, there's things to say about that too. But I mean, I see that as being a bit different in the sense that it's that they're not ethnic minorities. It's not like Xizang or Xinjiang. But I mean, it's up. I'm happy to talk about it if you want to. It's just.
It's a different topic, but similar in terms of intervention from the U.S. and from the West in general.
Similar in terms of intervention, exactly.
Rafael, let's shift a little bit to a different area. Last year, Xizang's imports and exports to countries along the Belt and Road Initiative countries reached more than 2 billion yuan and up 20% year on year. Imports and exports to RCEP member countries reached 652 million yuan, an increase of 5.2 times year on year. That's a really impressive, achievement over the years. So Xizang is increasingly, integrated with BRI countries and the regional group of RCEP. What kind of role? How do you describe the role it played, probably in terms of trade and investment, as well as the cross-border trade with, for example, South Asian countries, people-to-people exchange, cultural exchanges?
Well, I think the BRI is a very important initiative that is boosting the development not only of China, but also of many other countries around the world. And Xizang, I think its position is strategic for China to develop better relations with South Asia. So from here, we have easy access to South Asian countries. And the infrastructure here in Xizang is getting better and better. So this creates opportunities, I think, for the further development of trade between Xizang and our countries here. Also, of course, people-to-people exchanges, like tourism, exchange of students. There are many possibilities.
Many possibilities.
And as you mentioned, the trade along the Belt and Road has been growing year after year. This is a very good signal.
Yeah, along with this, poverty, alleviation efforts, and also the modernization drive throughout the country, and in particular, I would say in Xizang. Of course, if you respond to the concerns about this region, from the West again, they would say, oh, there's ecological issue, environmental, problem in Xizang. What I have seen, how is there such a problem, or is that a kind of accusation, basically consistent with the reality?
Well, I can say that some days ago I was in Linji, and I went to the surroundings of the city, and I could see that everywhere you go there in that region, you see that the nature as it is, the nature is well preserved. We can clearly see that the nature there is very beautiful, not because the government is like planting new trees, doing something new, but because it's well preserved from old times. And the government there is doing a very good work in preserving the environment in that region. And then here in Lhasa, I saw something different from that. This area is the environment before was worse than it's nowadays. And I could see that there are many efforts from the local government to improve the quality of the water in the local rivers and lakes, and also to plant trees in surroundings of the city. Here, I see the mountains here, they are very rocky, so it's really hard to make something grow there. But I was told the government has been adopting many scientific approaches to make the city greener. And some solutions are very, very intelligent, very innovative. And we can see that preparing the soil to make it richer in nutrients for plants, they are succeeding to plant more trees around Lhasa and environment in the city.
Mm-hmm. Seems there's, just like the rest of the country, there's a comprehensive development in terms of modernization, not only economic progress, but also poverty alleviation and also environmental protection. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.